1884. And I can say that was not yesterday. And this is the fourth in a series of If These Cemeteries Could Talk. Oh, the story they would tell. And we are proud to be visiting this cemetery today as we focus on the enslaved individuals who are buried there. We have identified 10 so far, and we believe there to be more. At least 8 in the cemetery were teachers, and at least 13 were veterans in the United States Armed Services. And so we would like to pay homage to them. There's an old saying in our community, is that you are not truly dead until they stop calling your name. So what we're going to do is to continue to call out the names of our ancestors, give it to our children and our grandchildren and generations to come, so that they will know about this people who were formerly enslaved but came out of slavery and made great contributions to this county, this state, and this nation, starting churches, starting schools, and being very important members of the community. On behalf of the Willow Hill Heritage and Renaissance Center, founded in 2005, and as part of formerly the Willow Hill School, founded in 1874, one of the first schools for African Americans in Bullock County, Georgia. Many of the members of this Johnson Grove Church attended Willow Hill School, and many of the families did so. And so at this time, we're going to ask the pastor, Reverend Maurice Hill, the current pastor of the Johnson Grove Missionary Baptist Church, to give us the invocation and welcome. Thank you.
At this time, I'm so very honored to be the pastor of Johnson Grove Missionary Baptist Church. As Dr. Jackson said, the roots here do run deep. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. And we're grateful for our forefathers, and we welcome you here, services each Sunday. In your Sunday school at 10 a.m., 11 a.m. worship service, and you're invited to attend, and God bless you. Let us pray. Most gracious God, we thank you for this start of a new day, oh God. We thank you for how you have kept us, how you have brought us through dangers seen and unseen, oh God. We realize it's not of our goodness, but your grace and mercy, oh God. Look beyond our faults, and you still provide and see our needs. So right now, in the name of Jesus, we ask you to forgive us, oh God, of where we went wrong and gotten out of your will, oh God. Keep us in the way, oh God. Father God, we lean not to our own understandings, oh God, but we acknowledge you with all thine heart, oh Lord. And now we thank you for this committee, this Willow Hill Committee, oh God, this Johnson Grove Church, this Portal community, oh God, our ancestors, our forefathers, oh God, for if it had not been for the Lord on our side, where would we be, oh God? If we had not been for the Lord on our side, where would we be? Now, God, bless us all. And we not are greedy or selfish, so we ask you to bless those who are going through trials and tribulations, hardships, bereavement, oh God. Father God, let them know that weeping may endure for a night, but your joy is coming in the morning, oh God. But till that day, give us peace, oh God, that surpasses all understanding. And we're grateful and we rejoice and we say thank you, hallelujah, thank you, God, for your mercy, oh God. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen, 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 and amen. God bless you. Y'all give God a hand clap of praise. Thank you.
Pastor, when you pray with deep inspiration and power. We know that you've been blessed from on high. We thank you that you've come to be a acknowledges, it does my heart great joy.
Amen.
Because we are a people who came from a people who come from a mighty long way.
Yes, Lord.
As I traveled the road, the dirt road coming into Johnson Grove this morning, my mind was going back because when Johnson Grove started, there weren't any cars now. Those were horse and buggy days. The tractor wasn't even here yet. And the train from the 1880s was in its infancy as a mode of transportation. And so we have to say, thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Lord, for what you have done. Now, Mr. Willie Pope is a man that I've heard sing a few times over at Willie Hill when we had a gospel place. And so it was put on my heart because I know he has some connectivity out in this cemetery, out of Pope Brady, out of Brady Pope, brother, and who married Troy Pope. Very important part of the Willie Hill community. That is where your connectivity is. So if you could come in your own way and deliver to us a selection from your heart, it would be most appreciated. In your own way.
I would like to say good morning. Good morning. Everyone. Once I hear this song, my feet pretty good to everyone. And do something. Let me see here. It says, try Jesus. I think that'll be a pretty good song. Try Jesus. He's all right. Try Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Try Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Oh, I done tried him and he's all right. Hey, try Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Try Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Try Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Oh, I done tried him and he's all right. I tried him early this morning, and I tried him, yeah, late at night. So I found out how good God is. So he woke me up early this morning and started me on my way. So I tried Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Tried Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Tried Jesus. Oh, he's all right. You know I done tried him and he's all right. He's all right. He's all right. Oh, he's all right. 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 I tried him. He's all right. I know he's all right. He's all right. My mother tried him. He's all right. He's all right. He's all right. Father tried him. He's all right. He got to be all right. He's 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 all right. So try Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Try Jesus. Oh, he's all right. Try Jesus. Yeah. He's all right. You know I done tried him and he's all right.
Try Jesus. He's all right. And I know our ancestors tried. That's how they made it over. Think about this. They were formerly enslaved, didn't have their rights, working in the fields long and hard days. But they were singing that song, but try Jesus. It's all right. And they were looking for a better day. That's right. And are we not the products of that better day that they were in. Try Jesus. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate that so much. Now, I'm going to give a brief history of the Johnson Grove Missionary Baptist Church. In 1880, in Emmanuel County, in the Himalayan community, the Skull Creek Missionary Baptist Church was organized. Now, at that time, it was in Emmanuel County. In 1905, Jenkins County was carved out. On September the 9th, in 1884, several members of the Skull Creek Missionary Baptist Church came down and started the Johnson Grove Baptist Church. Dan Johnson, Lizzie Johnson, Susie Johnson, for which the church was named from the Johnson family. Others, such as Lizzie Boston. Lizzie Boston was a Johnson before she married James Boston, just to see that connection. Sonny Lane, Lizzie Bell, Rosa Harris, all of these were members of the Skull Creek Missionary Baptist Church. Now, when they first came down, usually you get the Brush Arbor, then you get the Wall Church, and Reverend Willie Thomas at that time was the first pastor. On September the 9th, 1893, a deed was gotten from a W.H. Booker, who was a white man, 1 acre, to establish the Johnson Grove site that we stand on here today. There was 3 trustees from this church in the name of one, I'm sorry, the name slips me right now, but there were 3 trustees who got the deed from the church. One was a J.H. Harris, one was a Carter, and the other was Peter Menzies, as this comes back to me. So the church has had at least 17 ministers, and you are the 17th. But the minister which had the longest tenure, Reverend Jacob H. Thomas, from 1930 to 1975. So he left his mark on this church, and the church at one time operated a school. In 1950, we don't know the year the school started, but in 1915, the school existed because it's listed in the Douglas report that looked at all of the schools in Fuller County. There are several ministers, at least 5, that were ordained out of this church. And so, over the years, we had a new church built, and this is the current church. And the church has continued to grow and be a part of the community and a part of the Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Association, which was founded in the 1860s and now has a headquarters down at Guyton. At this time, we're going to ask Brother Donaldson to come and give us a selection. And as he gives us this selection, we're going to progress to the cemetery and talk about some of the families there, with emphasis on those born during slavery, the teachers, and the veterans. And you can come. And as he's playing, and as we move to the cemetery, think back to Africa, where we all came from. Think about the slave dungeon. Think about the great passage across the Atlantic Ocean. Think about those family members who never made it. Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. And many of them made that determination. Many went to the West Indies, and from the West Indies coming to America. And the first one landed America the 20 in 1619 in August. So this August, we will be celebrating 400 years of African and African Americans being in this country. And this celebration of doing these cemetery tours is a part of that, so that we can acknowledge and call the name of our slave ancestors, to let generations know that these individuals aren't forgotten and that they have made an important contribution. So as Mr. Donaldson is playing Deacon Donaldson, we're going to march out to the cemeteries and we're going to call the names of our ancestors and talk about a lot of the family members who are buried. As you will soon note, a lot of the individuals buried in this cemetery came from Jenkins County, Georgia. We're starting off with the Lawrence family. Roscoe Lawrence, who married Louise Harton, and that is related to Homer Lee and Henry Harton. And we have Jerry Lawrence, who married Lula Mae Burroughs. When I was doing the research, the information was not there to say who their parents were. But these were very important members of the Johnson Grove Baptist Church. And under J.W.H. Thomas, Jerry Lawrence was ordained as a minister. These are related to the current Mr. Ozell Lawrence. He is the son of Mr. Roscoe Lawrence and the Lawrence family, and these are little children buried who are related to this family, and also Ms. Lulabay is attached to the Burroughs family. The next, now we got quite a bit, so I'm just going to give a few details. Reverend I.W. Ward is the Ward family, and his father was Isaac Jane Ward, who was born during slavery, and his mother was Delia Martin, born in the 1870s. There were several siblings associated with Isaac Ward, and Mrs. Hall, Mrs. Gussie Hall, who many of you may know, was a sister of Isaac Ward, born in 1896 and died in 1953. Married Miss Luella Burrell, and we will talk a little bit about the Burrell family later on, but she is the sister of Tommy Burrell, okay? And she lived to be very advanced in age. Now, I looked up some of the other names recently because when I was asking around, not a lot of people knew. They had about 10 children. And Isaac James Ward was born in 1863 and died in 1926. Not him, but his father, and no one as of yet knows where that grave is. We also, I found recently that Isaac James Ward's father was Joe Ward, born during slavery in the 1840s. So that's a new bit of information that was discovered recently on the wards, because when I asked around, not many people knew, and I had not heard of that. And everybody knows Mr. Hinton Ward, now 85 years old. He has been the caretaker of this cemetery. Married Miss Roberta Wiggins, who is the daughter of Audie Parrish Wiggins and Cardell Wiggins. And these are associated with the Willow Hill community, as you well know, and also associated with the Wiggins. And we talked about the Wiggins when we were at the Scarborough Missionary Baptist Church, because Edith Tarbert Wiggins and John Wiggins, who was born during slavery time, are buried there. But Oscar Wiggins, who we will be seeing his grave a little later on, is buried out there. And Oscar was the brother of Cordell Wiggins, and Roberta is the daughter of Cardell and Audie. And actually, just speaking about them, here is Oscar Wiggins here. And there were a lot of the Wiggins, and he married Nellie Burke. And Nellie Burke's father was a John Burke, and he was born during slavery time, and I have him listed on the program as well. And then here is Oscar Jr., who was in the military. And I want to pause for a minute because I want all of you to call names of the former slave individuals. And so Isaac Ward, call his name.
Isaac Ward.
We remember you, Isaac Ward. Now here is Oscar Wiggins, connected to Oscar Sr. and Nellie Burke, and I just told you about them. Also talked about Audie Parrish, daughter of Dan Parrish and Emma Munlin. She was a school teacher at Willow Hill and married Cordell Wiggins, who was the brother of this Oscar Wiggins, who were the children of John and Edith that we talked about earlier over at the Scarborough Missionary Baptist Church. And I forgot to mention when we was talking about Miss Luella Ward Burroughs, she was a teacher here at Johnson Grove, and when they had the one-room schools. The Johnson Grove School, the church was located somewhere near where that pump house is, and the school was on the side of that.
Down further to the end.
Right down where Mrs. Hall's grave is.
That's right down there with Mr. Willie Hall.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Now this is all connected. Claudine Ward, that's Miss Llewellyn, Reverend Isaac's daughter, who married Charles Lindbergh. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Hurd family, because a lot of these graves in here belong to the Hurd family. The Hurd family traced their origin to Washington County, Georgia. That was during the era of slavery, and they traced their origin to a lady named Dempsey Smith, and she was born in the 1800s. And they had a child named Randall Hurd. He was born in Washington County, and he was born during slavery in the 1857 and died in 1926. And he's buried somewhere in this cemetery, but his grave site is unknown. Now, those Hurds, they believe in having a lot of children. They had a son named Gable Hurd,
and they had about 12 children. And then one named Silas Hurd, who a lot of these connections are here, they had 15 children. 5, 10, 15. So the Hurd family was a very important family. Many of them were educators. You can see the name. Want to call out Randall Hurd, who was in the United States Army in World War II. And want to also call out Molly Harris, because she was a teacher in Bullock County when they had the one-room school. So this is Randall Hurd. And so let's call out Randall Hurd's name. He was born during slavery time and he's buried here. Randall Hurd.
Randall Hurd.
All right. Now all of these are Hurd. All of these are Hurd. Very prominent family here in Bullock County. Many of them went to Statesboro High and Industrial School. And I want to call your attention to Annie Hurd Broadway. She was a teacher in the school system, spending a lot of her time at the Kamloops County school system. And she was a graduate of the Statesboro High and Industrial School. And in my collection, I have one of her photographs from graduating from high school. All of these are hers. All right, now we're going to go down here. Okay. This whole row is related to Nathaniel Williams and his mother, Alice, who had a brother named Arnold Jackson. That is connected in my line. Arnold Jackson lived to be over 100 years old. He was born during slavery in the 1850s. He's not out here. But he had a sister named Alice, who was a school teacher, and her daughter is here, Nathaniel Williams' sister. Her name was Mamie. She married a LeCue. So all of these LeCues that you see come from Mamie Williams, and she married Willie McHugh. Now, here is Cousin Nathaniel's grave here. I had the opportunity to interview him a lot and recorded his history. I want to call your attention to Alice Williams, daughter of Nathaniel and Mary Jessie Stewart. She was a teacher at the William James High School and died tragically in 1978. Very tragically. But she was a teacher, and we are remembering our teacher, Alice Vivian Simmons. That was her second marriage, but those who knew her, she was married to Mr. Collins at one time, if you know the history of William James School. So this is Cousin Nathaniel. Now, here is Marie Jackson Stewart, and she is was a Jackson, but she married George Stewart. Nathaniel married Mary Jessie Stewart, so they were sisters. And some of the family of the Jacksons are buried here. They originated in Jenkins County. So did all the Williams. Remember I said earlier you're going to have a lot of folks originating in Jenkins County. This is Herbert Andrew Stewart. I attended his funeral. These are all children of Nathaniel Williams, Rocky. And this is a very tragic story I want to mention here. These are the grandchildren of Richard Williams and the great-grandchildren of Nathaniel Williams. And all three of these children perished in a fire in Claxton, Georgia in 2007. And so they all are buried in the same coffin. Very tragic because there were no remains, just charred bodies after that fire. So we really want to call these little children's names, and Miss Janae Johnson, Miss Jessalella Smith, and Trey Dacia Porter, all sisters and brothers, even though some of them have a different names. but they perished in a fire. And when we were at the Scarborough Cemetery, we talked about a similar situation with Louise Moore Cheney's children and all. So we do continue to lose children in fires, and we really do want to talk about fire safety. Now we're going to move up and talk about the borough. Start over here. This is Mr. Spencer Burrow, born in South Carolina, who married Laura Anderson, and she was from Georgia. They were a group of people over from around the St. Mary's Missionary Baptist Church. He was born during slavery time, and these are the parents of Tommy Burrow and Luella Burrow we saw earlier, and there are several other Burrows in that family. They had a very large family. But I want to take a moment to talk about Mr. Tommy Burrows, because I spent a lot of time with him. He was born in 1912 and died 2018, very recently. And he was the last survival of those individuals who were at the Willow Hill School in March of 1946 when the Ku Klux Klan came and burned a cross telling African Americans not to go to the poll and vote. I want you to reflect that after the Civil War, and in 1870 we had the 15th Amendment, which gave African Americans male the right to vote. However, in 1877, the new Constitution for the state of Georgia installed a poll tax on those who vote. Now, what that means is a lot of the African Americans didn't have the ability to pay that poll tax. Therefore, they couldn't vote. It also happened to a lot of poor whites as well. However, if you were in the Confederate Army, and if your ancestors prior to the Civil War had voted, then there was an exception for you. Read between the lines. That was an exclusion for African Americans voting. However, this was a case before the United States Supreme Court. So in 1945, the poll tax in Georgia was overturned. It was during the governorship of Arnell. Now, interesting enough, that was in 45. In March of 46, the African American community was meeting at the Willow Hill School to make plans to vote in the 46 election. So there is a strong connection between repeal by the Supreme Court of the poll tax. And this was done nationally with the Voting Rights Act of 1964. So think about it. Even after being in slavery all these years, you get freedom, and they try to put laws together to prevent you from exercising your right. And if you look closely, even today they're doing that. You need an identification card. The polling hours are going to be something else. They're not going to be in your community. All tactics to keep us from voting. So I really wanted to stop at Mr. Tommy Burrow's grave site to tell this story, because he was there that night when the Klans came and say, do not go to the polls and vote. Nevertheless, the citizens of Portal, Mr. Golly Parish was in that group, and others did go to the poll and vote. Mr. John Lawton was there, and many other, Mr. Johnny Green, and many other people, Mr. Tommy Burrows, and he had a brother who was there also that night, Mr. Buddy Reese, and others who were a part of saying, we will go. Mr. Ronnie Scott, and he had his gun at the polls the next day in Portal, I'm told. So that shows the reliance and the resilience of the African American community. Now over here also, I'm not going to go to every grave, these are also connected connected to the boroughs here. Okay? Now, I want to, let's go this way. There's some Pokes out here. I want to mention the Pokes and the Brady before I get too far away. Okay, so all of this area in here are Pokes. Okay, so I think these are the two here. So this is Ida Pope. She was first a Brady. She married a Coney, and then later she married Troy Pope.
Yeah, here you go.
All right. Now, Troy Pope, and that's just connected to Mr. Willie here. Troy Pope was a really important man because he had a sawmill in the Willow Hill community, which was a source of employment for a lot of African Americans. Miss Ida was a pianist. My grandfather used to talk about her. A long time ago, they used to have things called frolics. That's where they played the music and played the piano, and they said, oh, she could lay on that piano and have everybody shaking all over the auditorium. And she was also known as a great ice cream maker. So she is connected to the Lee family. A lot of folk don't know that, but if you get far enough back, she's connected to the Lees. Now, the Troy Pope, there were several brothers. One was Warren Pope. He's down on the end there, and he married into the Donaldson family when he married Cousin Pet, or also known as Mary Donaldson, but he certainly had had a previous marriage as well. So there were several of the Pope brothers. Hardy Pope is out here. It's the Bunk Pope, they call him. And he was a very important deacon here at this church and was also important in the Charity and Goodwill Lodge in Portal, Georgia. And he first married Miss Eddie McCullum. And she was related to the Calvin McCullum family. Calvin was born in 1860 during slavery time. He married her. She died early. And later in life, he married Miss Queenie Clark. I used to know about them because when I was trying to straddle a little bit, trying to find my way, I went over to the house to visit a girl named Joyce Ann Clark. Oh, and Mr. Pope was rather strict there, I dare say. He kept his eyes on the prize. So, but anyway, you see Bill Gardner, Cleveland Pope, all of these are children of the Popes, and they attended the Willow Hill School. And I really wanted to mention Troy Pope because he was so important to the community. I also want to mention Homer Hart.
It's my granddad.
Born in 1892, died in 53. And Susie Sharon Hart. Now they had a son over here, Homer Harden, and there was. Okay, he's over there now. When I was a little lad, my grandmother used to take us to visit Miss Susie Harden, and they had a daughter named Sarah. And oh Lord, could she sing. And this lady sang from her heart with great passion. I mean, she could bring tears to your eyes, she'd sing. And you knew that she loved God. Folks said she was handicapped, but she was not handicapped from the Spirit of the Lord.
Right.
Was not. And she could show a lot of other folk the way. She was a strong believer. Mr. Homer Harden was a very, very important farmer. He was a big farmer. In fact, Mr. Lawrence actually worked for Mr. Harden at one time. Roscoe Lawrence, their father. So he really was important. He was a great supporter of the Willow Hill School. And at one time, he was a member of the Banks Creek Primitive Baptist Church before he then moved back into the Missionary Baptist Church. I've seen his names on the rolls there. So, and this is Homer Lee. He was, now we're not going to talk too much about Homer Lee Harden. He was Mr. Casanova type. Every lady that I've ever talked to said that Homer Lee Harden was her boyfriend. So he knew how to keep the women all stirred up. But also of importance, he was in the military. And so he served, and let's call his name Homer Lewis Harden.
Homer Lewis Harden.
In World War I, he was born in 1921. And Mr. Dill Harden, his brother, was a big farmer. He married into the Jones family, okay? And he was in the photograph in the early 40s when all of the African American farmers in Bullock County met in Statesboro, Georgia, in front of the Statesboro High and Industrial School. And he was there with his hat on. And a lot of other folk from this community was there as well. Now the Roundtrees and the Dukes, all of these folks are from Jenkins County, and the Dukes, Roselle Dukes, married into the Boston. So there's a connection between the Dukes and the Boston. Let me see, did I miss anybody over there? Okay, yes, I can't miss. Mr. Homer Lee Daughtry.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Married to Miss Inez Burke.
That's right.
Now, when I was a little lad, they're one of the few families that had a television in the community. So we all used to gather at their house. They had these rabbit ears on top of the television. You had to keep adjusting those. And the rabbit ear was connected to a pole outside, and you had to turn it by hand to get the right picture. And so we watched the Flintstones at their house, many of things. Barney and whatever, Wilma and all that. And we also watched Gunsmoke, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And so I wanted to call their names. Now, Mr. Daughtry is of importance because he was what we call a modern farmer. He was advanced in getting tractors, equipment to bale hay, and many other kinds of things that was associated with farming. Even though he was afflicted with his hand, it did not interfere with any of that. Strong supporters of the Will Hill School. Now, Miss Inez, you don't mess with her now. And you better not mess with Mrs. Chick in her presence either. She gets you. But she was a good woman. She was the daughter of Miss Lou Burke. And Miss Lou Burke lived in the Willow Hill community for a while. In fact, lived right across the street from my grandmother. And I used to go up and see her, and she died tragically as well with the fire. But she used to say, "Boy, I'll bust you open." And when she said that, she meant it. She was a good person. Here is also some of the Polk family. Miss Johnny Mae Polk, who was the daughter of Bunk Polk, went to Ed Waters College in Florida. There is Eddie McCullum, who was the wife of Bunk Polk. Ivory Polk, who is Miss Johnny Mae's brother. And all of these folk come from the area of Johnson Grove. These are little children of Bunk folks here. Now I want to talk about the Bossett family. Warm out here. So we're going to move kind of quickly. Okay, so the Bossets, there were several of them. They all were descended from James Boston, who was born during slavery in 1835. He had several children. One of them was Estelle Boston. This is her. And the reason I mention her name because she married my grandfather, Lindsey Jackson, a second time. And Lindsey Jackson was the father of my father, Ezekiel Jackson. And so he is buried in the Bossett plot because he married Miss Estelle Bossett. And most of these individuals here are related to the Bossett in some way or another. This is James Bossett, the one that was born in 1835 and died in 1919. Call his name, James Bossett.
James Bostic.
All right, we remembered you. And this, even though it's down here, this is his wife, Elizabeth Bossett, born during slavery in 1857. And so call her name, died in 1898.
Elizabeth Bostic.
And all of these other Bossett you see names are related to this James Bossett. And all of these, Lizzie Robinson, daughter of Estelle Bossett. Now Sarah Talbot, I gotta call her name. This was one of my classmates, Sarah. Sarah had polio, but she came to school all the time, and this was our first introduction to polio. She used to wear a brace on her leg. Daughter of Lizzie, who's the daughter of the one that married Lindsey Jackson. Okay, now here is one I need to. I got a few more we want to do before we go. It is getting warm. Okay, now. Hey, Mr. Lawrence, I know you are very historian. If there's anything you can help us out with, we appreciate it. Because I know you know a lot of this history. But this is the one grave we have to talk about. This is the grave of Prince Groover, born in 1791. Died in 1891, lived to be 100 years. And so this is one of the oldest markers of a formerly enslaved person that I have found so far in Bullock County, Georgia. I don't know who he was in slavery to. One wonders if the white Groover who gave this land, if he was somehow connected, I don't know. But he had a son named Frank Groover, also born during slavery in the 1850s, around 1858. I believe Aaron Munley married a woman named Lucinda Groover. I think this is the same connectivity to that Groover family. She married Aaron Munley, and they were members at the Banks Creek Primitive Baptist Church. But Prince Groover is an important person you should know. Now, all of this area here, we believe that former slaves were buried. When I talked to Mr. Hinton Ward, he said they were going to school in this building. Sometime they would have funerals, and they would dig up other graves and had to rebury them because they were not marked. And so I'm assuming because Prince is buried here, that this is probably the older part of the cemetery. Now here is another slave person over here. I dug this up yesterday.
Groover's name, Alvin.
Okay, let's call his name. Prince Groover.
Prince Groover.
We call your name.
We call your name.
Yes. And let's call Frank Groover's name as well, because Frank was born during slavery and he's buried somewhere here and we don't know where he is. And Frank had a son named Tom Groover who lived in Jenkins County, and Tom Groover had a daughter named Hazel Groover, Tom and Alice, and my father Ezekiel Jackson had 3 children by Hazel Groover. Ozella, Jan, and Jamie, who were twins. Now this is someone I just picked up yesterday. You can tell it's freshly done. I've been wanting to know who this person is, And I don't know, I haven't done all the research on the history, but her name is Olive Pearsall, okay? And she died in 1908. And she was the husband of M. Pearsall, and I don't know who they are now. I know that there were some Pearsalls connected to the McCraes over around the Fish Trap area, but whether it's them, I cannot rightfully say. However, we must call her name, Olive Pearsall. Here are connected to the Sampson and Hoover family. And the last grave we're going to do is in Gussie Hall. These are the Williams. I'll mention them. Remember we said there was a Susie Johnson and a Dan Johnson that came down from Jenkins County and helped start Johnson Road Church. These family members here are connected to the Williams family. You had somebody named Pink Williams who was a soldier. His grave ought to be here somewhere. Pink Williams is over here. Let's call his name. Say Pink Williams.
Pink Williams.
Okay, he just died in 2010. This is his grave. He was in the military. And the last one I want to call is Miss Gussie Hall, who was the sister of Isaac Moore, and she married a Willie Hall. Those of you who know Narrows Hall, Alice Hall, and all those halls, this is their mom and dad. Okay? Okay, so thank you so much. It's a little warm today, so that's all we're going to do for now. Mr. Lawrence, do you have any additions, anything you want to add?
No, sir. You covered everything. Boy, I know. I know. Hey, they can get back out over here. I don't know.
Yeah, those are the Sampsons that are connected to the Groovers. And along that back way should be some sisters to Tom Groover buried over there.
And Gus's
Right.
sister's buried out here too. At Blooming. Where's that buried?
I don't know where her grave is. There was,
I don't know.
I can tell you,
Really?
She's near here somewhere.
you know where she is?
I don't know.
So there's somebody named Lola buried out there who's a sister. Gussie and Isaac, but I don't know where their graves are. A lot of these graves aren't marked.
Is that Hall family related to James Hall?
No. Different Hall.
Okay.
Is this our grave?